Good morning, everybody. Working in a country where time is very important, I want to at least give you the benefit of starting at least somewhat on time, and then we'll see who trickles in this session later on. So I'm Gerard Bos, the Director of the Business and Biodiversity Program at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. It's a real pleasure and honor to be your host or your moderator for this session, where we are going to look on the way forward and actually see how do we bring all the great things that we've heard over the last 2 days further, and what are we going to do when we all go back to our desks and offices starting tomorrow. For this session, we are very grateful to have a fantastic panel which actually represents the various levels of business and biodiversity platforms that we have. We will have Mikko Ruti, who is the head of the Finnish Business and Biodiversity Platform, FIBS, and he brings a lot of experience from the multinational industry and the consulting experience, and he was also FIBS was one of the organizations that co-hosted this event. And the great thing is he can then talk about the business and biodiversity platform at a national level. What are the challenges and the opportunities there? He will be followed by Strahil Christoph, who is a policy officer in the European Commission, and you saw him facilitating the previous session. And Strahil, as he explained himself, is really the Commission contact point for phase 2 of the European Business and Biodiversity Platform, which is great because he can then actually present to us the challenges and opportunities you have at a European or at a regional level. And then he will be followed by a two-team of David Stoyman and Christina Neumann, who both are from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and David is responsible for the Business and Biodiversity platform there, and also the global partnership at the CBD level, and they will then be able to bring in the global perspective. Now, just to set the scene for this session, I would like to share with you a little bit of reflections and learnings from an IUCN perspective, as we have a 10-year experience of engaging with business. And what we are trying to do at IUCN is really to transform business practices so that they deliver biodiversity net gain. And we know that language is an important item there, so I'm looking also to you challenging us on some of the words or the terminology that we're using. This session will be fairly dynamic, you'll notice, and I'm going to press the speakers to speak within a short time because we only have 1 hour, whereas a lot of the other sessions that we had over the last 2 days were 1.5 or 2 hours. So if you feel that we are working under pressure, it's because we're trying to do a lot, but within less minutes than some of the other sessions had. The IUCN Business Engagement Strategy, and we heard this, is really looking to systemic changes. Our vision is to have a just world that values and conserves nature. And how do we get business really mainstreaming biodiversity and have it fully integrated in their overall strategy, and also see how business can actually influence all the actors working around them? For this, we see 2 main components. The one component is clearly in all their action, as much as possible, to deliver positive outcome on biodiversity and people. That's the vertical axis. On the horizontal axis, we look at how can this be done at scale. And traditionally, when companies go and tackle the biodiversity topic, where do they start? They start on their sensitive areas, sensitive sites, and they look at legal compliance. Now, of course, what we're trying to do is to trigger changes that goes beyond that. How can they move to best practices? And how can these best practices then become sectoral changes, which actually become the new level playing field for the next evolution? So we've actually categorized 4 tiers of changes. But what we also did is actually we went back to all the relationships that we had with business over the last 10 years, and we mapped them against that journey of transformation. And we checked back with these companies if they actually agreed with that. And it was sobering to actually see that most of the companies were actually saying, yeah, we are in tier 1 and we are in tier 2. We are not yet on tier 3 or tier 4. And remember, tier 4 is about changing business models. And clearly what we also identified is once you start working outside a bilateral relationship, but start working in a collaborative platform, then you're able really to drive into more systemic changes, because then the innovation starts to spark. So looking back, what were the mechanics behind this journey and this assessment? If we look back 10 years, and perhaps give us some ingredients on how to move for the next 5 to 10 years. Well, we all, and we heard that over the last day and a half, worked with committed businesses, and we've created knowledge and a lot of best practices. And it's fantastic to see how much best practices and knowledge there is out there. One thing we might need to think about is how do we organize it better so that we make it accessible to more, and especially to small and medium enterprises, because these best practices are very often coming from very large businesses. And here I've listed the companies with whom we worked in order to create some of these best practices. The next step we see is how can we create more pressure for other businesses to go through that change? Because that's probably what's missing today. And all the various sessions were actually highlighting this fact. We see the opportunity really to work more closely with industry associations, with the financial institutions, and that's a session we just had before, but also with government and civil society. Actually, are we equipping civil society with all the tools and the guidelines that we've developed with corporates so that they can go and influence others? We also have interesting mechanisms such as independent scientific and technical advisory panels that are independent bodies that actually advise companies in very critical and complex situations. But is this enough? Probably not. Because if we really want to scale up further, we need to have this multiplication and this creation of multi-sector collaborative platforms. Because then the best practices are really being exchanged and improved over time, and then we probably will have change in business practices really mainstreamed and demultiplied. So this is a little bit the challenge that we have and what we're looking at. And I actually see personally as the business and biodiversity platforms as one of that engines or the engine that can trigger some of these changes. Now, the one thing I'd like to do also with a nice picture, because you realize there was no pictures on my presentations, it was all graphs and dough. And I'd like just to pitch for the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii, Honolulu, which is in 10 months' time. I would love to see a lot of us again gathering there to actually show and demonstrate to the conservation community that's going together there, some 8,000 participants, where the IUCN members from the NGO community will be together, but also the state members, the governments. But the one missing actor very often is the private sector and business, and perhaps the platforms that are working with business. So the idea is, how do we convince ourselves to go out there and actually demonstrate that our collaboration platforms and the forward-looking businesses are not just the problem, they're really part of the solution. So I'm going to hand over now to the other speakers, but these are some of the questions that we will try to answer through this session. And if we're good in our time management, we will leave for some discussion time where we can interact with you and getting your thoughts on some of these. I'm going to stop here. Miko, I would love you to introduce the FIPS.